Good day. Welcome back. I'm Reverend Philip Ong, your co-student in God's Word through Salva Vida Ministries. We are now in a new series entitled Parables of Jesus in the Gospels. And for today, let's talk about John the Baptist or John the Baptizer and the harvest. Now, traditional Christianity claims that the parable of the harvest in Matthew chapter 13 speaks of the end of the world and human history, as is so often the case. Now, traditional interpretation has completely missed the context of Jesus' parable of the harvest. Now, John the Baptist, the baptizer, spoke of the harvest, and what he said demands a first century fulfillment of Matthew chapter 13. Okay, well, we are in Matthew 13, the parable of the harvest, the parable of the wheat and the tares. I want you to notice that Jesus said, now this is the reading from Matthew 13:39. The enemy who sowed them is the devil. The harvest is the end of the age, and the reapers are the angels. Now verse 40 says, therefore as the tares are gathered and burned in the fire, so it will be at the end of this age. So when Jesus spoke of the harvest, it is at the end of this age. Okay, ask ourselves this question. In what age was Jesus living? Well, he was not living in the Christian age. He was not living at the end of time. Jesus was living under the Old Covenant age. Now, in the Old Covenant age, according to Galatians chapter 4, verse 4, but when the fullness of time had come, God sent forth his Son, born of a woman, born under the law. So here, Jesus is born living under the law of Moses, or what we call the Mosaic age, living under the old Mosaic age or covenant age. And he said, harvest is at the end of this age, this Mosaic age, this old covenant age, that help us to put the parable and its proper interpretation in the proper context. Now, unfortunately, traditional Christianity has ripped this parable completely out of its Mosaic Old Covenantal context and said, oh well, Jesus is obviously talking about the end of the physical world, at the end of human history, at the end of the Christian age. But I want you to notice how perfectly Matthew 13 agrees with the message of John the Baptist. The baptizer said to the Pharisees and the Sadducees who were coming out to be baptized of him that Jesus, Messiah, the Messianic age, was coming after him. And verse 12 says, his winnowing fork is in his hand. He will clear his threshing floor and gather his wheat into the barn, but the chaff he will burn with unquenchable fire. Now notice what he said. His winnowing fork is already in his hands. He will gather the wheat into the barn, burn up the chaff, in other words, the tares, with unquenchable fire. John the Baptizer was talking about the harvest. Jesus is talking about the same harvest. But notice what John says. His winnowing fork is already in his hand. Here's something. You just got to see the point of this. The winnowing fork was the instrument of the end of the harvest. The end, not the beginning or the initiation. What John was saying, yes, the harvest has not yet begun. But the harvest was not only to begin, but to end. The consummation of the harvest was so close, so imminent, that he could say his winnowing fork is already in his hand. Let's compare this with the book of Revelation, chapter 14, verse 15. And another angel came out of the temple, crying with a loud voice to him who sat on the cloud, "Thrust in your sickle, thrust in your sickle." Okay, that's the harvest tool, and reap. That's like winnowing fork. And for the time has come for you to reap, for the harvest of the earth is ripe. Now, as we conclude, the one coming on the clouds of heaven is the Son of Man. In other words, Matthew 13, one who sows the seed is the Son of Man. In Revelation chapter 14, verse 14, then I looked and behold a white cloud, and on the cloud sat one like the Son of Man, having on his head a golden crown, and his hand a sharp sickle. Yeah, yes, you see the perfect harmony of Matthew 13 and the parable of the wheat and the tares. The parable of the harvest must be placed within the context of John's imminent harvest, must be placed with the context of Revelation chapter 14. And the imminent harvest, these things must shortly come to pass in the first century. So this will be exciting, as we will see you next week, as we say in Salva Vida Ministries, bringing hope in times of trouble and witnessing God's saving grace. Goodbye.
When the waves of life pull you down and your heart is lost and bound, there's a